Investigating Donald Trump. Reaction from lawmakers after the president calls the Democrats' probe a fishing expedition. The fight for life. More than 20 states challenge the Trump administration's efforts to protect the unborn. And floating away. On the day before Lent, New Orleans celebrates its famous Mardi Gras parade. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, March 5th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The president calls it the greatest overreach in the history of our country. He's reacting to the House Democrats beginning a wide-ranging investigation into his personal and professional life. The committee chair says it will be focused on obstruction of justice, corruption, and abuses of power. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. Democrats say they are fulfilling their congressional responsibility to do oversight and hold the president accountable. Now, I was in the Roosevelt Room here in the White House today where the president called the now mounting investigations a witch hunt, hoax, and said there was no collusion.
It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace to our country. I'm not surprised that it's happening. Basically, they've started the campaign. So the campaign begins. But the campaign's actually, their campaign's been going on for the last 2.5 years. So it's a shame. And the people understand it. When they look at it, they just say presidential harassment.
He answered that question after signing an executive order that will attempt to lower the high number of suicides among military vets. The president said he wants to make sure veterans receive the care they've earned.
Our mission is to mobilize every level of American society to save the lives of our great veterans and support our heroes in need.
The White House says despite significant efforts and billions of dollars invested, suicide rates among veterans rose 26% from 2005 to 2016. The president's executive order will create a task force to develop a system that more actively reaches out to veterans. Now, back to those investigations. The White House says Democrats are harassing the president, and this is a quote, to distract from their radical agenda of making America a socialist country and killing babies after they're born. That's a reference to the recent Born Alive bill that Democrats rejected. Lauren.
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. And the president accused lawmakers of being stone cold crazy. In addition to the House Judiciary Committee probe, other probes are seeking information about private conversations between Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us from the House. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Obstruction of justice is the same impeachment charges leveled at Presidents Nixon and Clinton. The House impeached Bill Clinton, though the Senate acquitted him. Now, some Democrats want to see President Trump impeached now, but Democratic leaders say it's too early. They say they just want to get the facts.
The House Judiciary Chairman demands information from 81 people and groups.
Our goal is to hold the administration accountable for the obstruction of justice, the abuse of power, and the corruption.
He writes former advisors like Sean Spicer, the president's sons, Donald Jr. and Eric, and even the National Rifle Association.
For 2 years, the Trump administration has been attacking the core functions of our democracy, and the Congress has refused to do any oversight.
Republicans today slammed the Democrats' latest investigation.
Clearly, it's a partisan vendetta.
They're launching this full frontal assault, which, as I said, is a prelude to impeachment.
I do think they should be more focused upon making life better for the American people than a partisan agenda. We've got probes going on for the president. We're going to find out if there's something wrong. In the meantime, focus on making life better for the American people.
It's going to preclude our ability to pass any kind of bipartisan legislation because they're just sucking up all the oxygen.
But New York Democrat Gerald Nadler defends his probe.
We are going to be the check and the balance. We are going to find out. We're going to lay out the facts for the American people and see what we can do about them to protect the rule of law.
Just the opening shots in a war of words that could run into the 2020 election year.
It's obvious that there's been things done wrong. Let's get all the investigations done and see where we are.
The House Judiciary Committee expects some people to hand over the documents right away. Others may not and could face subpoenas. Now, these investigations can be very long, what President Trump calls a fishing expedition. So the big question is, will it overshadow the president right through the 2020 election? Lauren?
I don't know. My bet is not on that. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Bob Menendez says the president still owes Congress an answer on the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
So the question before the Senate is, are we going to allow the assassination of a journalist who happened to be a resident of the United States to stand without a consequence? And I hope the Senate's answer to that is no.
The Saudi government said Khashoggi, a writer for the Washington Post, was killed by rogue operatives. Lawmakers have accused the Saudi crown prince of ordering his murder. California and 19 other Democrat-led states file a lawsuit against the Trump administration's recent pro-life measure. It bans taxpayer-funded family planning clinics from referring patients to abortion providers. Opponents say it would shift millions of dollars from Planned Parenthood to faith-based organizations. Hillary Clinton says she will not run for president in 2020.
I'm going to keep speaking out. I'm not going anywhere. What's at stake in our country, the kinds of things that are happening right now, are deeply troubling.
The former Secretary of State, Senator, and First Lady ran unsuccessfully for the White House in 2016. She says she has already spoken with several of the 2020 Democrat candidates. Hundreds of people have left the last area in Syria controlled by ISIS. The evacuations come 3 days after U.S.-backed forces resumed their push on the militants and brings their defeat even closer. Officers from the coalition screened the men who left the area to make sure they were civilians and not members of the terror group. Local media in Australia are providing details of Cardinal George Pell's prison term. He is in solitary confinement and in isolation 23 hours a day. The 77-year-old highest-ranking member of the Vatican to be accused faces 5 decades behind bars after being convicted of child sexual abuse. He denies wrongdoing and is appealing. The Vatican says world religions are key players when it comes to fighting poverty and promoting development.
Every religion is either motivated to work for the well-being of its people or has the capacity almost every week, if not daily, to meet a whole big crowd of its own followers. So if anybody has a message to address, who best to do it than the religious leaders?
Cardinal Peter Turkson previewed an upcoming Vatican conference on religions and the Sustainable Development Goals. The Cardinal pointed out religion plays a crucial role in providing education around the world. Church leaders in Morocco say they hope the Pope's visit later this month will increase dialogue between Christians and Muslims.
Le monde a beaucoup changé. Dans ce sens, la visite du pape François est différente.
The Archbishop of Rabat says it's important to build bridges, not walls. Pope Francis will visit the majority Muslim country March 30th and 31st. Pope Francis has named a new bishop for the Diocese of Memphis 4 months after its former leader was removed from office. Bishop David Talley is a native of Georgia and a former Baptist. He replaces Bishop Martin Holley, who was forced to resign in October 2018 after a Vatican investigation found he mismanaged the diocese. Holley blamed Washington, D.C. Cardinal Donald Wuerl for his ouster. Joining me now, Christopher White, national correspondent for Crux and The Tablet. He joins us from New York City. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Lauren. Good to be with you.
You did a 3-part series chronicling the rocky 2-year tenure of Bishop Holley, who Talley is going to replace. What was the problem with his leadership and with Cardinal Donald Wuerl, with whom he worked here in Washington?
Well, Lauren, according to a number of priests that I interviewed in Memphis, upon Bishop Holley's arrival in the diocese, within the first 6 months, he reassigned some 70% of the clergy within the diocese before really getting to know it, they complained. He also appointed an all-powerful vicar of clergy to the diocese, who many people called into question his management style and his financial spending habits. And upon arriving in the diocese, he shuttered some of the diocese's most successful social programs and ministries, all of which prompted a Vatican-led investigation last summer that eventually led, as you noted, to his removal in October.
So what about Cardinal Wuerl? He came on, Bishop Holley came on a show of ours on EWTN, defending his innocence and pointing the finger there.
Yeah, in terms of Bishop Hawley, and I'd like to say I tried to interview Bishop Hawley for this series, and he declined. But when he sort of mounted his defense, he said that Cardinal Wuerl was effectively out to get him, and that he effectively sabotaged his time in Memphis. Representatives from the Archdiocese of Washington said that was not the case, and that the two actually had an amicable relationship, which is why Cardinal Wuerl sort of celebrated his arrival in Memphis when he was appointed there.
All right, let's move on and talk about Bishop Talley. What does his appointment say about Pope Francis's priorities?
I think it's an interesting appointment. Bishop Talley, as you noted, is a convert from a Southern Baptist upbringing to Catholicism, and he left the Southern Baptist denomination over the issue of racial segregation. And so I think his appointment reflects a pretty sensitive pick on the part of the Pope to appoint this sort of bridge builder, sort of racially sensitive character, to a diocese that is, predominantly white Catholics in a traditionally African-American city. And so I think that's sort of by many observers today, a keen pick that knows sort of the inner workings of the diocese quite well.
What does Bishop Talley have to do to heal the country? We only have a few seconds left. To heal the state, not the country.
He said it himself today, listening. That's his first priority, and I think that's what he'll spend his initial months in office doing.
Thank you so much, Christopher White, national correspondent for Crux and The Tablet. You can follow him at CWWhite212. Women are promoters of hope in a world that seems less and less humane. That's the message female ambassadors to the Holy See are sending ahead of International Women's Day. The Vatican embassies of the United Kingdom and Peru, both with female ambassadors, sponsored a conference today highlighting the role of Catholic women in society. Courtney Grogan of Catholic News Agency says they focused on the role women play in fighting human trafficking.
The UK ambassador to the Holy See spoke today about how religious sisters excel, in particular in areas where government policies and laws alone can't reach.
Modern-day slavery impacts an estimated 40 million people around the world. Coming up, a possible cure for HIV using stem cell research. Plus, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton joins us on the fight for the president's border wall. A London man appears to be free of the AIDS virus after a stem cell transplant. Doctors in the UK say he's the second person ever to be successfully treated. But medical professionals warn the procedure is not for everyone. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. The European doctors who have been working to find a cure for HIV/AIDS say this is an important step in their research. It comes less than a month after the Trump administration launched its own campaign to end HIV.
As the Trump administration sets a goal to end the HIV epidemic in the United States by 2030, a potential breakthrough in the search for a cure. Scientists in the UK say a man from London who has not revealed his identity has experienced a sustained remission from HIV-1. The details will be released tomorrow in the journal Nature. Doctors are hopeful it could lead to an end of the viral infection, which affects close to 37 million people worldwide. But the head researcher says the treatment is dangerous.
It carries significant risk, it's unpleasant, and of course you're hospitalized for a number of weeks.
The procedure uses a bone marrow transplant, using adult stem cells resistant to the virus. For Catholics, the voluntary use of adult stem cells is moral and ethical, but the Church rejects the use of stem cells from embryos, which requires the destruction of human life. The first person to ever be cured of HIV, American Timothy Ray Brown, is welcoming the news a second person had a successful treatment.
I'm very happy for this patient. However, it's not a cure that's going to cure many people because you have to have the at this point, you have to have the blood cancer to get the stem cell transplant for it to be ethical.
Brown says he hopes the London patient will reveal himself to the public. Around the world, the Catholic Church continues to work towards a long-term treatment for HIV and AIDS. The Church runs facilities like this one in Panama, which houses dozens of patients. Some suggest the use of condoms to prevent the spread of the virus. The church is steadfast against artificial contraception and maintains condoms are not the solution.
The U.S. government continues to increase funding for HIV research, spending tens of billions of dollars in recent years, up from just a few $100,000 back in 1982. This afternoon, I spoke to a bioethicist from the Catholic University of America. He says this new procedure is not problematic according to Catholic teaching. However, it is important that patients know the risks. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. As the Senate is poised to reject President Trump's national emergency declaration, my next guest says the crisis on our southern border has been an emergency for decades. According to statistics from the Texas Attorney General's office, 68% of those caught crossing the border illegally into the U.S. enter through Texas. Between June 2011 and the end of January 2019, more than 189,000 undocumented immigrants have been booked into local Texas jails. Joining me now, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Ken, welcome back to our broadcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Critics of the National Emergency Declaration are concerned this sets a dangerous precedent. You're an attorney.
Hey, look, he has statutory authority to do it. Presidents for decades have been issuing these type of emergency declarations under the very same statute. There is no definition about what that means. Congress left that open to the president, and so Donald Trump's doing the same thing as all these past presidents.
Tomorrow, DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen is going to head to Capitol Hill to testify before a House panel. First time since Democrats have been in control of the House that they'll question her about this. Will it be a serious discussion?
You know, I think it's always a serious question about whether a president has authority to do something, but since he is relying on a statute. Now, the question of what money can be used, that'll be a whole other question. He hasn't directed any particular funds yet, so I think that'll be an interesting question, and if he doesn't have the authority based on Congress directing it to use certain funds, well, obviously he can't do it, but he hasn't made that determination yet, or at least hasn't told us.
I want to turn to abortion. You're a pro-life Republican, and it's an issue that's very near and dear to your heart. We reported earlier in the show that California and 19 others have filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration banning taxpayer-funded family planning clinics from referring patients to abortion providers. What's the likelihood of that being struck down?
Look, we've always believed that taxpayers should not have to fund abortions. There's too many taxpayers that would consider that, you know, morally wrong. And so I think what the Trump administration did here by putting that back in place, it follows, you know, other law that's been passed in the past, the Hyde Amendment. And so, you know, I think there's a good chance that that'll stay in place.
In your own state, SB 8, dismemberment abortion ban passed, and you're waiting for a ruling from the Fifth Circuit. You say you're confident, but we just saw a drastic law passed in New York where you can have an abortion basically right up until birth, and other states are following suit. So why do you think that the Fifth Circuit ruling is going to come down in your way?
Look, because I think states have a right to regulate abortion, and in this case, you're talking about literally ripping baby parts apart. It's a horrific procedure. We showed it in court. We talked about it, and so the state has a right to protect both women and the unborn from being cruelly killed.
But a federal judge right now, there's a lawsuit asking a federal judge to strike down all of those abortion laws in your state.
That's
so
true.
You're confident about the Fifth Circuit, but then there's this other suit that says all of your laws, including allowing doctors to, or not to perform the abortions, to have someone else do it.
Well, as you know, you can sue about anything, right? So for them to sue on every single law together is ludicrous. I would be shocked if that case was successful on their part. I think we'll win that rather easily.
All right, well, we'll have you back when you do.
Okay.
All right, thanks so much. Ken Paxton, Attorney General, Texas Attorney General. Thank you. A church in West Virginia yesterday caught fire. The blaze was so hot, firefighters briefly had to leave. Then they saw what happened inside the building. Amid the charred wreckage, none of the Bibles were burned, and none of the crosses were harmed. The Coal City Fire Department says no firefighters were injured, and officials were expecting everything inside the Freedom Ministries church to be destroyed. They later said on social media, quote, "Odds were against us. God was not." Up next, the Daily Caller's Christopher Bedford on the reporting of allegations in the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez campaign. And one last hurrah. Thousands converge on New Orleans for a pre-Lenten party. York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez denies allegations she and her chief of staff violated federal campaign law. The complaint, drafted by the conservative National Legal and Policy Center, accuses her and her chief of staff of funneling nearly $1 million in contributions from political action committees. The chief of staff established private companies that he also controlled. The story was reported by the Daily Caller News Foundation. Joining me now is Christopher Bedford. Sorry about that, sir. Editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller. And you had actually an exclusive story about the same thing. So
We
it seems
did.
like she's in a little bit of hot water here.
She is in a little bit of hot water. There's been a complaint filed so far with the FEC that money from PACs that were supposed to support her was transferred to private LLCs. And the problem with that is we don't know where that money was spent. And PACs have to disclose where that money was spent without penalty. So there's a lot of smoke there, but there's no necessary fire. And what the Daily Caller News Foundation has uncovered was that one of the major PACs, the Justice Democrats, their goal was to get rid of an elected Democrat and replace it with progressive. They had raised about $1.8 million. They're not allowed to coordinate with the campaign, but they were legally under the control of Ocasio-Cortez and her chief of staff. And even up until 2 weeks after the election, when they changed their site, and up till December in their filings, she and her chief of staff were 2 of the 3 board members.
But they deny they've done anything illegal.
She's denied so far. They denied they've done anything illegal. She specifically addressed the FEC complaint, which is still going to be a longer investigation, and she's not yet addressed this pretty glaring problem.
All right, let's move on to somebody else, another female Democrat representative in hot water, and that is going to be Ilhan Omar in her latest anti-Israel comments. Some Jewish people are saying she should be kicked out of Congress, and other Democrats want her censured. The House is going to vote on a resolution tomorrow condemning anti-Semitism, but her name is not on that. I haven't seen anything like this in my 25 years of covering Washington.
It's a clown car, the freshman class of Democrats. They're getting a whole lot of pretty radical folks, this is part of the compromise, is they're going to censor her, which means nothing. It just means you've been rebuked, like a child, basically. But they're not going to mention her name because they don't want to really piss off the progressives too much here.
They don't want to annoy the progressives.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Tick off.
There you
Sorry,
go.
I'm from Boston.
That's okay.
But there's a problem here in that the Democrats are starting to become attacked. You see the leader of the Women's March attacking Nancy Pelosi as a, quote, white feminist. I mean, we're disagreeing over ideas here, and the attack from the progressive allies is attacking race here. It's a very, very sordid group.
Before we go, President Trump said earlier that the House Judiciary Committee, and we reported this, calling for documents from 81 Trump allies, is political presidential harassment. Do you think it was a good strategy on behalf of the House Judiciary Committee to send out all 81 requests at once?
No, but you may as well because the stories change so quickly. The news cycle is going to move on. President Trump is going to call it harassment. They're going to attempt to find something. Their best shot here is going to be going after his private companies. Because if you go after him and the White House, he can do what President Barack Obama did, which is just ignore you. They don't have to turn over. I mean, the Sergeant of Arms is not going to come and arrest the Attorney General if he doesn't appear. So their biggest thing is going to be constantly embarrassing him in hearings. And we had a master class on this when he was in North Korea or in Vietnam.
And the network spent, the entire day covering Michael
Democrats,
Cohen.
It's smart Democratic politics, but it might backfire if they go too far.
Thank you so much. Christopher Bedford, Daily Caller. Appreciate you joining us. Finally tonight, it's barely above freezing today in New Orleans and here in Washington. But that did not stop people from celebrating Mardi Gras there.
Viva New Orleans, the northernmost banana republic.
For the final day before Lent, thousands of people enjoyed parades and parties despite wearing multiple layers of clothes. Today marks the end of the Fat Tuesday season, and here's a fact for you. It began January 6th, so I want to be in New Orleans from January 6th now until February, eating all the king cake I can possibly put inside me. That does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night and God bless you.